welcome Millennium Fellows to our second webinar. We're excited to have you all.
I'm Maite Bojardo from Universidad de Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico.
Briefly introduce, I'm a medical student currently in 6th year, and I'm focused on SDG 3 and United Nations Academic Principle number 1, promoting good health and well-being, providing multidisciplinary therapies to communities without medical access.
I'm a senior student majoring in international studies with a concentration in international commerce, and I'm advancing SDG 8 and United Nations Academic Impact Principle number 1, supporting local artisans in commercializing their Mexican handicrafts.
Today, we are very special guests joining us, the visionary ambassador Scott H. DeLisi. For the first half an hour, we will hear from the speaker, and the second half an hour we will be dedicated to questions and answers. So you can have any questions, please submit them in the chat box below, and you will have the chance to ask them.
Ambassador Scott H. DeLisi served the government of the United States for 34 years, capping his career representing President Barack Obama as American Ambassador to the Republic of Uganda from 2012 to 2015. Currently, he's serving as the Executive Director of Sorwe, a charitable foundation dedicated to helping the people of Nepal recover from the devastating earthquakes of 2015 and build a stronger, safer, and more resilient future. Welcome, Scott H. DeLisi.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Though I will take exception, I don't know that I deserve the title of visionary ambassador, but I'm still delighted to be with you today.
Okay, so let's start with some questions.
Sure.
What motivates you to work in the social impact sector?
You know, when I was a young man and I was pondering my future, I had no clue as to what I was going to do. And I somehow stumbled into the Foreign Service, really. This was not a lifelong plan. I came across an article in the Wall Street Journal one day saying that there was a test. And I thought, I do tests, so I took this test. And I managed to get in, and I thought, that's great. But I joined because I needed a job, not because I was driven by a sense of service or a commitment to engage the world. But I very quickly learned that it was all about service. It was about service to my own country, but it was also about service to a broader set of ideals, of values, of things that I believed in, and things that would help to make the world a different place. And the more I engaged, the more that sense of service came to define me and to drive me. And it made a huge difference in my life. So when I became an ambassador, I'll just say that suddenly you're asked to do more than just implement policies. You're asked to shape the policies. You're asked to have a vision about where we're going. And it's irrespective of what the president or anyone else might be saying. At times, you have to know how you're going to lead. You have to know how you're going to engage the world. And I really did have to ask myself that question. And I realized that after many years of working in the diplomatic service, that idea of service, of contributing, of being part of something bigger than myself, really was what mattered to me. That's what defined me. And it defined my engagement as an ambassador. It defined my last decade or more of service to the US government. And then when I left the government, I realized that just because I was no longer serving in that official capacity, that didn't mean that I had to stop engaging in the world. And so that's why I chose to lead the Sorwe Foundation. I've chosen to engage with the Millennium Campus Network and all of you, the Millennium Fellows, which I think is a tremendously important program. And I applaud both MCN and the United Nations for their role in developing all of this. But for me, I can't think of any other way to live today. And when I look at the challenges and the problems that we face globally, and that your generation is going to confront, I mean, God knows, you guys are the ones that are going to have to solve a lot of this. When I look at those challenges and think, How can I not be involved? So it's all about how we engage the world. And for me, this is just, it's the choice I've made. It feels right. It's the right thing to do. And whatever contribution we make, I hope that we can have an impact.
That's amazing.
Awesome. We have another question.
Sure.
What advice do you have for all the 530 fellows that are working on addressing the 17 SDGs?
You know, you are facing a really daunting set of challenges, right? I mean, these things are just, they're overwhelming. These are challenges that we as a global community are struggling to address. So folks might look at you as Millennium Fellows and say, how are you guys going to make a difference? What is the impact that you can have? Well, I got to tell you, you can have a tremendous impact. We all can have a tremendous impact. And this is one of the things that I would say you have to recognize. The work that you do, the efforts that you make will matter. It does not have to be on a global scale, not especially as you begin. You do not all have a global platform. When I began, I didn't have a global platform. I still don't, but we all have opportunities. But the work that you do, whether you are touching 3 lives, one community, no matter what it is, you're making a difference. But if we fail to try, we're never going to change anything, right? So do not believe or do not feel that you've got to change the world tomorrow. Look at what you can have an impact on. Look at where you can make a difference. Gear your efforts accordingly. You know, I met a woman when I was in Nepal, when I was ambassador in Nepal. There was a woman named Olga Murray. When I met Olga, she was about 80 years old, right? And she's running around Kathmandu with her iPad in her hand and gray hair and glasses. And today she's 90 something and she's still going strong. But I said to her, I said, Olga, tell me your story. So Olga said to me, she had come to Nepal the first time when she was 60 years old, right? She was a lawyer working in California. She was widowed. She was getting ready to retire. And she thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And she went on a trek in Nepal. She went to this little village. And she's sitting there at night and she's watching a mother by the light of a kerosene lantern trying to help her children with their lessons. Now, the mother was probably functionally illiterate, but she knew, that mother knew the transformative power of education. And she thought, if only I can help my children somehow, this could change our entire family. It can change the trajectory for the future. Education matters. It's something we've sometimes forgotten about in the United States. We have forgotten about that transformative impact and power. But Olga saw that and she said to me, Scott, it was like a little cartoon bubble popped into my head. And she said, that's what I'll do. I'm going to help with education of girls in particular, but educating children in Nepal, helping. And she thought, maybe if I can help 2 or 3 kids, a handful of kids in the course of a year, this is a good thing for me to try. This is a good place for me to begin. And she did. When I met Olga, as I say, she was 80. That was 20 years later. Her small little effort, she just wanted to touch a few lives, had grown into a fantastic organization. They were helping countless children. They were changing social norms. They were addressing nutritional needs. They were doing a wide range of things, many of which are related to the SDG goals that you guys are looking at. And what I learned, and what I hope that you'll learn as you go along, if you probably know it already, it's not the size of the organization. It's not how much money you have. But if you bring a true commitment, energy, and passion to the things that you do, if you are determined, you can change the world. You can have an impact. And Olga grew this into this huge organization as they were candidates for this $500 million grant. And I looked at her and I said, Olga, did you ever dream that the organization would grow like this? And she said, no, I just wanted to help a few kids. But what she was able to do was phenomenal. It's what I want to be Olga Murray when I grow up. This is what I want to do. It doesn't matter what your age is. I love you guys. I love your energy. I love all that you bring to the table, your creativity and your vision and all the rest of it. It is fantastic. But you don't have the market cornered on passion and vision. That's something that we keep throughout our lives, or we should. And I hope it's great that you guys care about this stuff right now. But I hope you're going to still care about it when you're 60 and when you're 70 and when you're 80, that this is part of a lifelong engagement that you will bring to the table to change the world in which you live. Because it doesn't stop when suddenly we get a little bit older and when we have a few kids and we get a little too busy. You have to know that what you're doing is a lifelong commitment. And this is what I love about the Millennium Fellowship program and the Millennium Fellows. I believe that you are making a commitment that no matter where your life will take you, no matter whether you end up in business, whether you end up in social services, whether you end up working in the faith community, no matter what you choose to do, whether it's government, whatever it may be, that you will have as an underpinning this commitment to the world in which you live, that you will bring that energy and that commitment and that passion to all that you do, and you can make that difference. As I said, it doesn't matter the size of your program, and right now your programs may not all be huge, but you're beginning an effort that will endure and that can make a difference for this planet, and we've got to begin somewhere. And if you bring that commitment, you bring that energy, you bring that passion, I think that together we can do something.
Great. So in the Washington Post interview, you mentioned how India introduced you to foreign service. Could you please tell us what drove you to foreign service in the first place? And what has been the most satisfying feeling or experience that you have gotten from public service?
Okay. Well, I told you a little bit of the story. When I was a young man, it was the tail end of the Vietnam War era in the United States, right? I graduated high school. I went to the university. The campus was still unsettled. Many young people were asking this question, where am I going? What am I doing? And I was too. So I quit school. Didn't know why I was there. I quit school. I went to work. But then, a year or two later, I traveled. For the first time, I really traveled. I traveled outside of the US. Went to Europe. Spent about 9 weeks, had my backpack and a Eurail pass, and I traveled around and I saw the world suddenly. I saw that there was so much more beyond that I hadn't seen as a kid growing up in Minnesota. And I came back and I thought, geez, I'd love to engage this world. I really would, but I thought, how do I do it? You guys have this tremendous opportunity that's been created exactly for people like you. But at that time in the 1970s, in Minnesota, I didn't see that path forward. So I went back to school, though. I ended up in diplomatic history, not because I wanted to be a diplomat, but because I had a professor who made it come alive, right? He told it as a story about how individuals were affecting the course of the future, the relationship between nations, and what that meant for the lives of people every single day. And I was intrigued and I was fascinated. And I thought for a minute, how do you get to be a diplomat? And as I said, this was Minnesota. It was the 1970s. And I thought, well, you must have to know somebody. I had no clue. And it didn't occur to me to go to the library to do the research. And there was no internet. Yes, I am that old. There was no Google. There was no way of looking this stuff up. So I forgot about it until I saw that ad in the newspaper. A couple of years later when I was in law school, and I didn't want to be a lawyer anyway. So I saw the ad. It said the test is in a week or so. I got in under the deadline. I thought, why not? That's how I came to the Foreign Service. It wasn't driven by, I wanted to be a diplomat since I was 3 years old. But then once I did, it took some time I will admit, for me to find my voice within the Foreign Service. I was impressed. I came in and there were these wonderful people. I was surrounded by some really, really sharp people. And I kind of thought, maybe I don't belong here. I don't know. These guys, some of them had wanted to be diplomats since they were 3 years old. I thought, do I really fit? I kind of thought they'd tell me to go home any minute, and I probably would have. But they never did tell me that. So I stayed with the process. And at first I was reluctant. And this is one of the things I hope that you won't be. I was reluctant to offer my views because I thought, oh, these folks are older. They've got so much more experience. They know this, they know that. And so I was quiet. And I was quiet as well because I will confess that in the diplomatic service, one of the things that you're challenged to do is to always see the other person's perspective, right? That's what it's all about. It's understanding the full array of issues, and you have to understand where this other person is coming from. And so when you're always seeing the other side, it sometimes becomes a little bit more challenging than to know exactly what you think and what you believe. Right? And you can say, oh, I think this, but on the other hand, because you're always looking at that other hand. But over time, I found my voice increasingly, and I realized that even while we can look at the broad array of issues and understand the other's perspectives, we have to know what we stand for. We have to know what we believe in. We have to know the values that define us, that shape us, that lead us, that guide our path. And if we know who we are, if we know where our moral compass points, if we know what our values tell us, then it's easier and easier to find your voice and to articulate that. And for me, so one of the greatest satisfactions I had initially was just realizing that no matter whether I thought I was going to be listened to or not, was that my voice mattered. And I had to speak. And I had to find a way to engage that world as I had wanted to as a young man, and as I still did, and engage it in a way that was true to what I believed were the important things for me, what I knew were the important things for me. So along the way, in terms of the greatest satisfaction, the greatest joy that I've taken from this, there are several things. One has been the opportunity to mentor, to engage colleagues. Not because I think that I can impart to you or that I could impart to my younger colleagues in the State Department some divine truth, some great wisdom that you would carry with you forever, but if through our engagement and our conversation, it encouraged my colleagues and others to open their aperture, to think about the world differently, to look at the issues more broadly, to tackle the challenges, to bring their energy, their truth, their commitment to the equation. That was a great thing. And I found great joy and great pleasure in those sorts of engagements and discussions. So it's a good thing. And then there were the more, I don't want to say that that's an intangible, but some of the more concrete things that we touched upon. We saved lives every day through the work that we did. We touched lives every day. We were redefining the future, and I know a lot of the stuff that we do doesn't always make the headlines. It's not always the story on the front page of the New York Times, but it doesn't matter. We saved the lives of children. We saved the lives of people suffering from HIV/AIDS. We saved mothers in childbirth. We built a stronger future. We addressed the needs of communities. We looked at agricultural development and saw that we could make a huge difference. We looked at this wide range of issues in the world. We looked at human rights. We looked at how we could support human dignity. We stood for the voiceless. We made a difference. In Uganda, we saw, for example, there was some pretty horrific legislation, anti-homosexuality legislation, that we stood against. I didn't believe when we did that we would lead them to change the legislation, but I believed that we had to stand because it mattered, because this was something we believed in, something we cared about, something that reflected who we were. The legislation was changed. And this to me was, you talk about satisfaction. It wasn't, oh, look at what we did, but knowing that we had helped to change the lives of so many people in the LGBT community in Uganda, that we had opened a door for them, that we had fostered a dialogue through that process that was going to redefine the future. It's still hard to be gay in Uganda, God knows. But did we change things? Yes. And it's when you see that the work that you do, that commitment to your values, can lead to change in the world as well, that you can have an impact. That's where you find your satisfaction. That's where I found mine. That's where I hope you'll find yours. Yeah, because you guys, I hope, will bring that same commitment and that same engagement to the world and to the issues that you're tackling.
Sorry, I was.
I saw your lips moving.
We would love to hear more about your story and your experience in Uganda. Can you share with us how you worked on developing this initiative and how you set a plan to achieve this goal?
Which initiative?
We saw in the interview when describing a typical day in Uganda, you mentioned working on an initiative to fight malaria that could potentially save around 156,000 lives.
Sure. Well, it was, listen, I'll tell you, I was tremendously proud of some of the work that we did. And that initiative was one of them. But, you know, so again, you got to remember, as an ambassador, you're leading a big team, right? And I had partners in the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Centers for Disease Control. The U.S. military was very active in the work that we did in health. And all of them brought a sincere commitment that was matched by my own government, a commitment to engage on the issue of fighting malaria globally. So in the context of Uganda, where we were funding we funded probably 90% of the fight against malaria in Uganda. So given that we felt that there was a considerable responsibility on us to look at these issues, and that we were the primary funder in any event, I had a team of experts who could sit down and say, what do we think is going to make a difference? What's going to have the greatest impact? And they worked in partnership with the Ministry of Health. And I give the Ministry of Health in Uganda great credit, although they were not able to bring much in the way of resources, at least dollars or shillings, to the table. They brought their expertise as physicians, their knowledge of their own country, and a willingness to learn. And I think one of the critical things was finding the right sort of partners who are open to trying new approaches, to thinking about things differently. In Uganda, though, the effort on the fight against malaria, it wasn't rocket science, as they say. It was simple measures that aimed at prevention. It was bed nets. We did, the first time ever, I think, a universal bed net distribution across the entire country of Uganda. And it wasn't just distributing bed nets, it was the education, it was the follow-up, it was the commitment. It was understanding that it's not just enough to hand a bunch of folks in the village bed nets and expect that they aren't going to be used to make a veil for a wedding dress or for nets for fishing, that these were designed to keep people healthy. They were to be used and how they should be used and when they should be used. So bed nets was a huge part of the equation, as was indoor residual spraying, as was engaging our partners in thoughtful discussions about what makes the most sense. We had the president of Uganda was pretty much convinced that the mosquito larvicide, that was the answer. And every study said, no, it's not. But he had his head was in the science of 50 years ago. And trying to shift that thinking was a huge challenge. But so, the malaria program was a great program, and we reduced the rate of malarial infections with all that that meant for society and for children and for the future. That was great. But that's what you get to do when you're leading an embassy and you've got the U.S. government saying, yes, one of our efforts is going to be the fight against malaria and tuberculosis, and we had this huge HIV program. It's great to see what you can do when you've got $350 million to fight HIV/AIDS, right? Terrific stuff. But what do you do when you're you? When you are young people on the campuses, when you're a Millennium Fellow who's saying, how do I make a difference in the world? You don't have $350 million at your disposal. That doesn't mean you can't build something like Olga Murray did. You can build something. But you've got to remember that as you start, your strategies and your engagement is going to be different than what the big development partners do. But being entrepreneurial and being creative and trying, all right, you may fail. Failure is okay. There is nothing wrong with failing. But you got to try. You've got to figure out what's going to work. And you've got to make this an ongoing commitment. I think for me, more so than the malaria program, we also had a program it was called Saving Mothers Giving Life. We had looked in Uganda and we saw that the rate of maternal mortality was shocking to the conscience. How could we stand by and see so many women dying on a day that was supposed to be a day of joy and happiness, the day when they gave birth? And instead, we were losing so many mothers. And we said, why? This isn't right. We got to think about this. And we didn't know the answers. So what did we do? We did hackathons. We brought a scattergun, I won't say a scattergun approach, a multifaceted approach. And we threw, and again, it required resources. I admit, that's always the challenge when you're starting out. Where do you get the resources? But we tried. The point is, we tried all sorts of different things. What was going to matter the most? Was it the prenatal classes and care? Was it having skilled birth attendants? Was it having a decent operating theater? Was it arranging vouchers to get women from the village to the hospital, to a skilled care facility? Was it creating rickshaw ambulances or bicycle or motorcycle ambulances? How were we going to do this? What was going to have the greatest impact? And all I know is that over the span of a year, through this coherent and cohesive and multifaceted effort, we reduced the rate of maternal mortality in the districts in which we worked by close to 40%. That was phenomenal in the span of a year. And some of it was about education. Some of it was about talking to people about reproductive health. It was talking to husbands. It was talking to the men and getting them engaged and realizing that they had to be responsible partners on these issues as well. It was all of it. Then the challenge was, of course, to figure out which of these different endeavors, they all contributed, which had the greatest impact, which were scalable, where could we build? So no matter what you do, you need to be critical thinkers as you look at your own endeavors. You need to ask yourself, so if we're seeing some progress, if we're having an impact, we're doing this in a village, we're doing this in a community, what's working the best? Why is it working? How do we build upon this? Can we build upon this? There's so many questions that you've got to ask in terms of project design and feasibility, and whether you can sell this policy, whether you can build the partnerships, can you find the support you're going to need? It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that you learn in 5 minutes. But over time, through your persistent engagement, it can make a difference. And you begin to do this stuff. I do not consider myself an expert on development. I don't consider myself an expert on any of these issues. An ambassador doesn't have to be. We don't have to be experts on anything, but we have to be knowledgeable on the issues that our team needs us to be knowledgeable about when they need us to do so. We need to be able to be salesmen. We need to be articulate. We need to have a vision that's founded in these values. And this is the other thing I would say to all of you. You may have a great program, you may have a great idea, but you need to learn as diplomats learn. You need to learn to be storytellers, and you need to be saleswomen and salesmen. You need to be able to find a way to take your idea and convince people that this is something that matters, that it works. And part of that, part of convincing them, is you have to believe in what you're doing. If you believe in it, people, even if you're not a skilled public speaker, even if you're uncomfortable as can be speaking publicly or speaking in front of a group or presenting, if you're speaking about something you believe in, something that you are passionate about, then people feel it. They sense it, and you can make a difference. And that, for me, on whether it was malaria, whether it was saving mothers in childbirth, whether it was in the fight against HIV, whether it was on the issue of stunting, whether it was on LGBT rights, whether it was on democratic governance. When people, what you can do, what you have to do, somebody has to do, is to provide the leadership, the vision, and tell that story for you to be successful. So that's, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think that all comes back to this question about malaria, but this is what matters. This is the stuff that matters. It's not always the technical things. You can find plenty of technical experts. You can't always find visionary leaders. And you all, I think, by the choices that you have made to be part of this effort as Millennium Fellows, you, whether you know it or not, are setting yourselves in a position to be visionary leaders for your generation, to be thought leaders, to be the folks who will tell the story. And I hope that you'll be doing that, because we need that. We need that more than ever, given the complexity of the issues that we face looking at the world that lies ahead of us.
Thank you. So, what are some specific useful tips you can share with us that we can apply to our social projects?
I say again, I'm sorry.
What are some specific and useful tips you can share with us that we can apply to our social projects?
I don't know. No, I've offered some. I think some of what I've been talking about. See, I missed out, and it's a shame. I regret this. You know what I wish I had been? I wish I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. I wish I had had that experience, that more hands-on experience of engaging the world. What I'll tell you, though, is this. So when you ask your tips for making your social projects a success, since I left the State Department, I've been doing a lot of different things. But one of them is leading the Soarway Foundation, right? This is a foundation that is committed to continuing the work that I began as ambassador in Nepal, work that was focused on disaster risk reduction and preparedness, right? Yeah, I went out to Nepal after the earthquake in Haiti. 230,000 people died in that earthquake. And we all said, oh my God, how terrible, how can we help, what a disaster. And we texted 1-800-Haiti, we gave $10, that was all great, good. But really, if we truly care, the time to act isn't after everyone's dead. If we truly care, the time to act is before the disaster strikes, when we can make a difference. So that was the work that I brought to the US government's efforts in Nepal, and it's work that I continue as the executive director of the Soarway Foundation. But in doing this, I found as well that now, when I was an ambassador, I told you it was great. As an ambassador, I didn't have to raise funds. I had a fundraiser. It was called the Internal Revenue Service, and they did a wonderful job. They raised all sorts of money from the US taxpayers, and I got to spend it. That was great. Now suddenly, leading a nonprofit, how do you make a difference if you don't have resources, right? So the first challenge, of course, is always about raising the funds. And that's still a challenge today. But I'm not going to talk to you about fundraising. You got to figure that out for yourself. And if you do, please send me an email and tell me how you did it, because I struggle every day to get the resources I need to make the difference that I want. But what I'll tell you is, at the same time, by being engaged, by knowing what your vision is. So we started with a few, we said, we've got to make a difference on the ground, though. If we're going to be credible, we have to do something. So we found credible partners. That's number one. Know who you are working with. Find a partner that can help you to make a difference. You can't do it all alone. I sure can't do it all alone, and I don't need to go to Nepal and have another 20 folks from America come, because we're all going to be experts and drive around in SUVs and tell them how to reinvent Nepal. That is not what they need. What we needed to find, and fortunately as ambassador, I had a leg up because I'd worked with a lot of groups in Nepal. We found the partners who were working on the ground, who had the trust and the faith of the communities with which they engaged, who knew the needs of those communities and who had plans on how to address it. They needed some help. They needed someone to help leverage what they already were building. But we found partners who knew what they were about, who shared our vision and shared our values, and a commitment to transparency and accountability. And this is another thing I will tell you: as you engage in all of these efforts, make sure that these issues of transparency and accountability, of ethical leadership, are foremost. You need to be able to show people who you are, and that your values and principles are right, and that your leadership is right. And if you can, that helps a great deal as you move forward and try to build. So we found partners who knew what they were doing, and that was important. And the more we found partners, and the more the people realized that we were sincerely committed to engagement, even if we couldn't fund everything they wanted to do, but that we would bring something in terms of partnership, then we were able to really begin to build something important. I've seen the number of projects in our portfolio just expand exponentially. I can't keep up with all of them. I can't fund all of them. But I've got more and more people reaching out to me, and we're building out from a core concept, but out expanding the vision all of the time. We know, for example, that risk reduction isn't just building a strong house, right? It's not just a strong, safe school, though those are really important. It's helping the most vulnerable in society. It's working with women. It's empowering them to be entrepreneurs, to bring in resources so that they can make the choices that will keep their families safe. It's helping the most vulnerable in the society, people with disabilities, to be seen, to be heard, both so that they also are kept safe and not forgotten when it's time to say, how do we prepare for a disaster, but to recognize that they can contribute to making the nation safer. So we're doing all of these programs, and it's really been about, again, knowing who you are, where you're trying to go, finding these partners, and then building. Don't worry overly much about where the money's going to come from. You may not be able to fund everything, but you've got to build this concept. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to be able to sell it. It's got to make sense. And if you do this, you can grow it. Just as Olga Murray grew her effort, because she brought passion and energy and commitment, and she knew what she was doing as time went on, turn to the experts, figure it out, grow, be open to all of these things. There's such tremendous opportunity out there for these, I hate using terms like this, but to define synergistic. It's become a word of art these days. But there are these connections, and one thing leads to another. And suddenly now, the Sorway Foundation, over the span of it's almost 3 years that I've been doing this. We still don't have the funding base that I'd like, but we're doing better. But the projects we're doing are having an impact. I can see it, I can point to it, and I can take great satisfaction in it. And this is what you're all trying to do, right? You want to have an impact. And again, we can talk about big projects like what we did in Uganda, but the results of those projects, you know, at the end of the day, the results of those projects were measured in a big report that talked about the number of households reached, the communities served, and they were statistics. It was great information on a piece of paper. The joy for me today in the Sorway Foundation is that the work we are doing is work that is measured, our success is measured by the look of pride on a woman's face who says, I am now earning when she was not before. I am paying the school fees for my children. I am making a difference for my family. It's measured in the tears of a young man who looks and says, my father's life was saved by the Nepal ambulance service that you're partnering with. Because of these people, our family is still together. Every day, we get a chance to see this, the impact, the real impact of our work. And I hope that no matter how successful you are, and as your projects grow, as I hope that they will, you may become further and further removed from the human impact of your projects, but never forget that you do this not just because these are broad global goals. They are, and they're important for the future of mankind. But the work that we all do touches real people. It changes their lives, and being in touch with that, being part of that human connection, that matters too. And I hope that you'll all have that opportunity as you go forward.
Okay, so now we will move on to the time of questions. For this part, we would really appreciate if whoever has a question can send it first through the chat, and then we will start calling your names.
Once we call your name, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question. Yeah, so what has been your most difficult challenge before you came an ambassador?
Okay, there she goes.
Okay, still don't take, before I became an ambassador or since I became an ambassador?
Before you came, he asks.
Well, before I became an ambassador, I was clueless. So that was probably my most difficult challenge before, was just trying to figure out who I was going to be. Yeah, again, that's why I'm so envious of you guys. The opportunities that you are having, this journey that you're on, it's a journey of tremendous self-discovery as well as engaging the world. It's a chance to begin to define who you're going to be and what your future will look like and how you will be part of the world in which you live. And that's pretty cool. I didn't have that. So my greatest challenge before I became an ambassador, well, I guess before I became an ambassador, I would have been throughout my career in the Foreign Service too. But as I told you earlier, it was finding my voice. It was finding the confidence to know that what I believed, that the values I held, they mattered, that I could really make a difference and that I should make a difference. And I struggled to look beyond the day-to-day of learning my craft, because that's what you had to do as a young diplomat, right? You had to learn your craft. But it had to be more than just learning about a job. And that took me some time. It took me longer than than in retrospect I think it should have. But just because wisdom comes late, or at least the opportunity to engage comes late, doesn't mean you should reject it when it comes. So.
Agree.
Thank you very much.
Now, Andrew, can you please unmute yourself? There you go.
Hi guys. Hi Ambassador DeLisi. Thank you for talking with us. I had a question on I had a couple of questions, rather short. One on trying to find your passion, and how do you know how to apply yourself and to what people to try to partner with, and how to get how to accomplish something or how to accomplish a goal and try to help others. And the second, within your experience, being an ambassador in your professional life, but also before then, what have you found are what's the best way to overcome any failure or challenge, both psychologically and also, I guess, professionally, in order to continue with what you're doing and to try to ultimately accomplish your mission?
Okay. The first question again was, what was, say again?
Discovering your passion.
Discovering my passion. As I was just saying, it took me a long time in a way to discover my passion. And even today, it's that sense, Andrew, of who am I to be sitting here talking to all of you guys? Sure, I've got a title. That's great. Yeah, I was an ambassador. Oh, big whoop. People called me excellency. But does that make me any smarter, any more qualified than anybody else? I've had a range of experiences, but it took me a long time to believe that my voice or that my passion truly mattered, or that when I would articulate it, that anybody should even listen. And I'm still not convinced that they should, but I've become much less shy about saying whether you're going to listen or not. If I have an opportunity to speak to something I believe in, I will do so. Now, finding that passion is tougher. And I don't know how to me, it was a process that occurred over time, but I guess it really happened for me when I became an ambassador, because by virtue of being the leader of an embassy, by virtue of that role, my job was to be able to tell my team why we were there, what we were doing, what mattered. And that really forced me to take the time to say, what does matter? What matters to me? And I wasn't asking, what matters to the US government? I hope that the two of them were going to link up okay. But at the end of the day, what were my values? What was the reason I served? Why did I care? And that took that took reflection. And it took looking at the challenges that were immediately before us and saying, how do I tackle these, and why do I care about these challenges? Why do these matter to the US? Why do they matter to me? How do I tell the story? And in doing that, and in weighing the priorities and saying, well, this is more important than that, and I'd say, but why? And in working through this on an intellectual level, gradually you came to see that, oh wait, there's a consistency here in the way I'm approaching this and what I'm thinking about and in what matters. And so why do we care about health in Uganda? And you had thought that through. And you realize that this tied in with this sense of who I was as well. That why did we care about health? Why did we care if somebody died from HIV/AIDS in Uganda? What did it say about us? That we were committed to that fight. What did it say about us as a people? And through all of this, you start to say, okay, I guess this is who I am. This is what I care about. This is what my passion is. And you continue to move forward. There's no clear answer as to how you find your passion, my friend. We go out and we think and we engage the world and we see what makes our hearts sing, if you will. But you will find those things. I mean, you'll suddenly say, the more I read about this, the more I think about this, this gets me out of bed in the morning. This gets me spun up. This gets me pissed off. Those are things that become part of your passion. And those passions may shift and they may change, but you've got to find them. I would argue that you've got to find it. You've got to care about the stuff that you're doing, because if you don't, you're not going to have the impact that you want. And how do you carry on in the face of failure? And God knows that there are plenty of failures and there are plenty of challenges. There are days that I get discouraged with the Sorway Foundation, for example. It's been a hard path. It really is a challenge to build something that I want for the future. It's hard to convince people to give the money. It's hard to make sure that the projects are going to have the impact that I want. It's hard to make the difference that I seek. And there are days when I think, I'm carrying an awful lot of this on my own. I could be doing a lot of other things. Why do I need to do this in retirement? Why aren't I just, screwing around, walking my dogs and just hanging out? But it comes back. What gets me going again is in part that voice inside that just says, but you care. You care about this stuff. This is who I am. You got to know who you are and what matters to you. But what really gets to me is I'll get frustrated and I'll be ready to throw in the towel. And then you get the email or the phone call from someone whose life you touched. Or you go on a trip and you meet someone who says, thank you. You cared when no one else did. So what you're making a difference. Your passion matters to us and we want to help. And suddenly somebody, so recently I had a woman in Uganda who saw the work that I was doing in Nepal, a woman I had met. She was a secretary, worked at the Turkish embassy, didn't have very much, didn't make a lot of money, but she said, I want to help. And she went out and she contributed handicrafts and artwork and all sorts of things that people donated so that we could make a difference. And then she sent me a check for $200, not a fortune. But for her, it was a fortune. Suddenly this woman said, I trust you and I believe that you are committed to making a difference. And I want to be part of that. So then you kind of go, how can I walk away? Even as frustrated as I am, even if we weren't successful with this project, how can I not try again? So you do. You persevere. That's what you do. You persevere. There were times I'd get frustrated and angry when, with governments I dealt with their lack of commitment, their lack of concern, their lack of engagement, including my own government at times. But you carry on. Because what's the alternative? We're all going to turn our back and walk away, and that's not an acceptable alternative to me. As I said before, it's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. And if we fail, we try again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Scott, for all the experiences, your time, and this wonderful webinar. Thank you all for all the questions. We want to respect Ambassador Scott's time and your time, so we will wrap up this question and answer session now.
I apologize. I was late, so if you wanted to do a couple more questions, that's fine too. It's up to you guys. Or if you're ready to get me off the screen, that's fine as well. Either way.
Okay, we can have one more question if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Okay.
So, Connie,
can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Ambassador. My name's Connie. I'm a student at Northeastern University. And thank you again for taking this question. I'm honored to be asking the last one. My question is about the scale of impact versus how personal your impact is. I've tinkered around the idea of Peace Corps. I think being on the ground, you see and feel the impact you're creating every single one's lives. But I've oftentimes been encountered with the counter argument, parents saying, oh, if you only just, climb up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and if you were to become a corporate executive, you can leverage so many more resources at the top to help so many more people. So I'm personally at this intersection of, do I go to the ground or do I, become going to finance or, leverage the private sector to do more social good? So I'm curious to hear what's your advice and take on this issue. Thank you.
It's a really good question. And I'm doing both, or I've done both. Okay. I've been able as an ambassador to make that difference, I hope, or at least you try to make that difference at a more global, at a broader level. And now today at Soarway, we're making a difference, one village at a time, one person at a time, one family at a time, but it all matters. I will tell you that in some ways, I take almost a greater personal satisfaction these days in being able to see the impact of the work that I'm doing and knowing that the hard work and the effort that I put in is producing a tangible result that I can see and touch. And it's a result that I can see and touch and that I can control and that I can shape. Unlike as an ambassador, as I said, oftentimes it's a much broader, huge project that you see bits and pieces of, but you never feel quite that same sense of ownership and direct responsibility. And the impact, you're touching a lot more lives, and that's really, really good too, but you don't always feel the same satisfaction, and you may be more constrained. If you talk about going up through the corporate world, absolutely, or in government or anywhere else. But in those processes, in those systems, in those structures, you are constrained then by others' views, by the corporate policy, by the government policy. There will always be constraints that you have to work within, and that's okay. That's the nature of the process. And working within those constraints, you can still make a real difference. But I would say to you that if you have the opportunity to do the hands-on, the more direct engagement, that does not mean spending a tour in the Peace Corps doesn't mean that after you come out, you aren't going to be able to enter the corporate world or do other things. You can do them both. And I would say that having that breadth of experience is important, and that the experience, for example, many of my colleagues in the State Department had experience as Peace Corps volunteers. Being able to bring that, knowing the impact that our work has, knowing what it really meant, gave them a broader understanding when they were working on the grander scale, if you will. It caused them to see the work of that grander scale differently, to argue for a different set of outcomes, perhaps, or a different set of values that drove that work. So, it depends on what your heart is telling you right now, and it doesn't mean you can't go back to Peace Corps later in life. I've toyed with the idea. That's the one thing I wish I had done earlier, that I would have liked to have been a volunteer. But we can't do everything. But so I was on that bigger scale, and now I'm at a smaller scale. But I can take what I learned as an ambassador and apply it to the work I'm doing at Soarway, and that's good too. So Connie, it's great that you've got the options ahead of you. Go where your heart takes you. Both are good. Both, at the end of the day, what's going to matter is not so much which one you choose as to who you are and what you're valuing and why you're choosing. If you know why you're doing it and what you seek to achieve, that's what matters. But go into either one with your eyes wide open, knowing what it is you're going to do. But don't think, as I said earlier, I would just say, don't think that just because that Peace Corps experience is only going to be one village or one community. And boy, does it really matter? And I had a lot of volunteers who asked me, does it really matter, Ambassador? I'm going to leave here and people are going to say, they're going to forget about my project, a month after I'm gone. And that might even be true. But it's not just the project. It's not just the specific thing you are doing. It's your interaction, engagement with them over the span of, say, a 2-year deployment. And who you are, the values that you espouse, your view of the world, how you share that, how you engage with them on all of these things will have an impact that lasts far beyond any project that you do. And I will tell you, I had people in Uganda, I had people in Sri Lanka, I had people in Botswana who would come up to me. And these were folks who were 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, and say, oh, Ambassador. I still remember the Peace Corps volunteer who came to my village when I was a kid, and the impact that they had on my life and how they've touched me and how much that still matters to me today. So both paths are valid. Both paths can allow us to engage. And I hope that you'll have a chance to experience them both, perhaps, but whichever one you choose, just again, know why you're doing it and what you seek to achieve and pursue it with all you've got.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ambassador Scott, thank you so much. How can fellows be in touch with you to any follow-up questions? And we
I'm happy to answer. You can contact me on my email. You guys have my email? All right. Let me, here, I'll message it here. Just a second. I see the message board is up there. I just haven't bothered to type. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm happy to friend people on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on, that's one of my many email addresses. I do answer emails. I'm sometimes slow to answer emails, but I do try. I'm happy, and we can chat online. And if there's a call that's warranted, I'm happy to chat with people as we go forward. Things are a little busy, but I always try to make the time. Okay.
We will also thank the Millennium Fellows that attended this webinar today, as well as Sam for making this.
Thank you very much for all your incredible work and for making this fellowship full of surprises and tools to make our social projects have more impact.
Well,
thank you all, and have a great week ahead.
And all the best to all of you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your commitment to the world. It matters. Yeah, you guys rock. Thank you now.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thanks.